we are back.
We're back.
Your friendly neighborhood Democrat, Victoria, and of course GOP Jim are back in action. We've had a very busy summer, so there wasn't much time for podcast work. But as the weather cools down, so are our schedules. And we will have more episodes coming for you very soon. This episode, we have a listener-submitted topic, ranked choice voting. So let's get into it. So, what is ranked choice voting? Well, it's an electoral system in which voters rank candidates by preference on their ballots. Simple enough, but here's where it gets a little complicated. If a candidate wins a majority of votes on the first round, that person wins the race, of course. But if no candidate receives a majority of the vote, the person with the lowest number of votes is eliminated, and the second choice votes of that candidate's supporters will go to the remaining candidates. The rounds continue until 2 candidates are left, and the person with the most votes wins. So, Victoria, now that we know what it is, what do we think about it?
I think that at first glance, ranked choice voting sounds complicated, right? Like, I didn't understand it at first, but now that I've researched it, I think that it makes sense because you're just really filtering down the votes to figure out where the preference lies instead of wasting votes on trying to figure out who the best candidate is versus who has the best chance of winning and where do you place your vote. I think there is a lot of misconception about ranked choice voting, that it doesn't work or that you're getting more than one vote or that it could be unfair. And so I think that learning about this topic today is going to do a lot of our listeners a lot of good.
Yeah, I'm with you. My first impression is that it's a little complicated, right? I wasn't aware of exactly how the system works until I did research for this episode. So, would the everyman who is going to vote be able to understand this without research? And, if not, would we expect everyone to learn how it works before voting? Is that even feasible?
If they know that we exist, then yes, it's very feasible. We're going to condense it down into one episode. Just give us a listen on your drive to the polls. It's great.
Of course, yes, we will educate everyone. But for everyone who doesn't know about our very wide-reaching podcast, what would you say?
I think it's just another way that politics and our whole political system can be really intimidating. I think a lot of people don't even vote and don't participate because it's intimidating watching the debates, getting informed on all the various issues, understanding people's platforms, and then getting registered and voting and informing yourself on all the different areas, both national and local. It's intimidating. And so then changing the way that process runs to begin with is another barrier.
In the past, when voting was made more complicated or more difficult, we called those Jim Crow laws, right? So I'm not saying that ranked choice voting is a Jim Crow thing. It's not even on the same level, but it is a conversation that needs to happen before this is adopted nationwide, right? Is it too complicated for the average person?
But on the other hand, in my research, people like to say that there's better turnout when there's ranked choice voting, and that those who have done it in New York City or Maine like to say they participate in it again and they really enjoyed it and they think that it's a better system. So who can say if it's a better system or if people like it once they understand it? It's just definitely one of those barriers to entry.
Right. And should voting have another barrier to entry?
I don't know. We're going to have to find out.
Time will tell. This is a relatively new concept that is getting put into place. For example, Alaska recently had their very first election with ranked choice. Republican Sarah Palin lost to Democrat Mary Peltola in the Alaskan congressional race. Now, this is notable because Alaska's had a Republican congressman since the 1970s. Now, Sarah Palin blames her loss on the confusing new system. whether it's that or that she was an unlikable bad candidate, who knows? But, it's their very first experience with it, and there are already accusations that it is too confusing.
I don't even know if I should comment here. I have a lot of other ideas about Sarah Palin. Sure. Yeah, well, it's ranked choice. That's the reason she didn't win. That's why.
She thought it was too confusing.
Well, when you really get into it, is it confusing? You're just putting down the order of your preferences. It's not that confusing in practice. You're putting on the ballot, the order in which you wish for people to win. Mm-hmm. I would say it's most confusing for the people on the other side who have to do all the work of figuring out what the most preferred candidate is, right? Because then that turns into like a multi-tiered system of who makes it to the next level, You
mean the vote counters?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's not actually hard for people just walking in and saying, like, this is my first, second, third choice. Or however many choices we're deciding people get.
Well, it's different, so it will take some adjusting for, like, the average voter. But the actual process, as long as it is clearly worded on the ballot, should probably be okay.
And I would argue that when people are deciding who to vote for, they already have multiple, like, people in their mind that they're trying to decide between.
Oh, I don't. Do you typically have that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, you are Victoria the Democrat, but you lean moderate on a lot of issues, and so you have multiple candidates in mind. You don't typically go in to check off all boxes in one party.
Right. And I'm trying to decide between, like, well, I like this person for this reason, but I like the other, person for that reason. Who do I decide between? Mm-hmm. So I think having a first and second choice become really naturally to me.
For you, I know, making...
Okay, the listener doesn't know that I'm very indecisive by nature, and that's why you're laughing.
I was trying to figure out how to say that. Yes, for those people maybe who are like Victoria, who are a little more indecisive, maybe ranked choice voting will work out in their favor. But for people like myself, who always go in with the number one choice in mind, it doesn't really change anything for me.
I think I could fall into ranked choice voting pretty naturally. Yeah. Is just my point.
Fair enough. But let's go back to, it is probably more difficult for the vote counters. I mean, they would have a harder job. It would take them longer. It would take longer to get results of elections. Okay, it already takes a while.
Mm-hmm. Not a job I'm interested in.
No, but these people are generally volunteers who do this, so...
Right?
I would be interested in hearing what they would have to say.
Yeah, I would be really interested in how much they're, like, interested or really against that change. One criticism that I read about ranked choice voting is that the person with the most votes can lose, mm-hmm. which is not technically true. In Maine in 2018, they thought that the person with the most, who was put in the first spot, lost. But it's still true that the most widely preferred candidate was the one who won. So that was still the person who was most often in one of the top 3 spots.
I actually have that information right here. I got that too. In 2018, after ballots were counted in Maine's 2nd Congressional District, Democrat Jared Golden trailed Republican incumbent Bruce Poliquin by about 2,000 votes. But with the ranked choice voting system, Golden ultimately won by 3,000 votes, picking up Democratic votes that initially went to independents. Okay. So the people who initially voted third party for their first choice may have put him a second choice. And so he ended up winning in the ranked choice.
Right, which is also what I've read, is that with ranked choice voting, you get less lost votes or wasted votes, mm-hmm. where people are not voting for a third party or like someone where they're less likely to win because they're trying to vote by their party.
Well, I think there would be lost votes in ranked choice too, right? Like, say there were 5 names on a ballot and you only ranked 3. and now they're all eliminated. So your now blank ballot wouldn't be counted in the final vote at all, right? Your vote literally did not count.
Right. But one stat that I read was that there's 3 times less. Like, you're 3 times less likely to have a lost or wasted vote in ranked choice voting than in a typical election.
Well, define a wasted vote in an election right now.
Let's say that I'm a libertarian and I want to vote for the libertarian candidate, and the libertarian is definitely not going to win, but I definitely want to vote for that person. You could categorize that as a wasted vote because I'm not actually making a difference in the way that I'm voting in my election.
Your candidate not winning doesn't mean it's a wasted vote, at least in my opinion, right? You still voted for who you wanted.
No, I agree. But that's just the way that my research categorizes wasted votes, because throughout the ranking system, if I get to have my libertarian choice as the first one, and then I have one of the main players as my second or third, I'm still making a swayed choice in the direction of the larger game of the election, even though I still get to have my personal opinion of ooh, I have my libertarian flag thrown in there, But
ultimately it is just as, wasted, as you say, as it was before. If your candidate gets thrown out, then it is more wasted, right? And if your votes aren't counted at all, if you vote for the bottom 3 out of, 5 and the top 2 only make it, then your votes don't matter at all. I would argue that there's more space for wasted votes in a ranked choice system.
How so?
Well, like I just said, if you vote for your top 3 on a ballot with 5 people and your top 3 end up being the bottom 3, you have 0 votes in the final outcome.
That's not more choice for a lost vote, though. That's the same as it would have been before.
Well, your vote gets counted for the third party in the system right now.
Mm-hmm.
Define if that's wasted. They may have lost, but at least your candidate's up there.
I know that we keep saying wasted vote, and I agree with you that that's not actually a waste. As long as your voice is being heard, that's still not actually a waste, right? Yeah. Because it doesn't matter if the person that you're voting for wins or loses, just as long as your voice gets counted for something.
Right.
I don't actually think that's a waste, but that's how these things are politically verbalized, right? That's the vocabulary. And so in those terms, I think that if we're using ranked choice voting and your second choice gets to have more sway over who the ultimate winner ends up being, that actually counts for the end result.
Yes, and I agree with that. I know what you're saying there.
Okay.
But if your vote not getting counted is a potential in ranked choice, then that would literally be a wasted vote. You see what I'm saying?
No, because it doesn't seem any different than how it's already working.
Okay, that's fine. We've been talking about third parties a lot. So every time I've heard about ranked choice voting before now and before the Alaska thing, the whole Sarah Palin thing, usually the people advocating for it are these third parties, right? They're the libertarians who, always lose elections, and so they think that this ranked choice voting is going to give them the edge they finally get. They think maybe that Republicans, just for example, will always vote Republican first, but maybe they'll put a libertarian as their second choice. And maybe that will be enough to have a libertarian win every now and then.
What do you think? What's your take on that?
What I think is, let those poor libertarians keep dreaming of a future where they might have a small chance of winning.
Uh-huh.
No, I mean, it's complicated, right? I don't want to say anything too bad, but usually they lose because their candidates are loonies and not because people hate them. You know what I mean?
It's a nice thought. I don't know that that's really going to change a lot for them, but I think that ranked choice voting is an interesting idea, and I'm not really as opposed to it as I thought I would be.
Okay.
I like the idea that it saves us from having more elections, hypothetically.
Right. In this system, we would drop the primary, and we would just have the one election.
I like that.
That's interesting. I mean, potentially that saves time and money for the state and for the volunteer poll workers. It would be one less election they have to work. They would just have to do more work for that one election. So, I mean, there's an argument there.
It would be more convenient for me personally, and I find that motivating.
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay. You only have to go in once. So, let's talk about you personally then.
I love this topic.
It's more convenient to only have to vote once.
Uh-huh.
It's more convenient for people who are indecisive.
Oh, yes. Less research. Thank God.
And there's a potential for third parties to win.
Sure.
And so all of this seems to be your dream scenario for voting here.
I'm not hearing any downsides, Jim.
Well, I don't love it. I think...
Oh, here come the rain clouds.
Well, I'm not entirely against it. Like, I don't think the current voting system is broken, right? Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. The people who advocate for this change are people in the third parties who don't see any other way for the candidates to win. But my candidates win.
I know. I don't think that the way we vote is broken. There's a lot of other things we could improve in government than the way that we vote.
Right. Like, this is like the least of it.
Yes. I'm with you.
It doesn't seem to be a problem, so don't fix it if it ain't broke, or, something like that.
Well, at least I'll give ranked choice voting the fact that I find it interesting as an alternative. Usually when people try to improve upon something we've always done, I find it almost a waste of time. Like, the way that things work are fine, but this is interesting and has some potential at least.
Exactly. Time will tell. Maine's had it for a little while, but Alaska just adopted it, and that's all there is. So we're going to have to wait and see these election outcomes and see how people are reacting to it and get some polling as time goes on. And maybe it becomes more widespread. Maybe people get used to the idea and it'll be easier to implement. But right now, I'm not convinced it's good enough to drop our current system for it.
Yeah, I think that's enough for now. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Great Compromise podcast. We appreciate you sticking around over the summer while we took a little break. Please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and we will be back with more next week.